Welcome back to the deep dive. This time we're tackling logic and critical thinking.
Oh, very nice.
And you've given me a really unique way to do it. Audio lectures that use a murder mystery
Oh, cool.
to teach the concepts.
I like it.
I'm excited to see how this plays out.
It's a surprisingly engaging approach.
Yeah.
I think we should say right up front,
Yeah.
we're not aiming to make you logic experts
Right.
overnight,
No.
but rather to give you tools to think more clearly
Okay.
and make better decisions in your own life.
That sounds incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Especially with the amount of information we all encounter every day.
Right.
So we've got this murder mystery, right?
Yes.
Who's the victim?
The victim is Cassandra Thomas,
Okay.
a grocery store owner,
Okay.
and the lectures use her case to introduce Aristotle's concept
Whoa.
of the categorical syllogism.
Syllogism.
Yeah.
That rings a bell from somewhere way back in school.
Uh-huh.
Refresh my memory.
Sure.
What's a syllogism?
A syllogism.
And how does it apply to a murder investigation?
It's a way to structure an argument using categories.
Okay.
So imagine this. The detectives find a bloody knife at the scene.
Okay.
A syllogism could be, all murder weapons are evidence.
Uh-huh.
This knife is a murder weapon.
Okay.
Therefore, this knife is evidence.
Okay, so it's like connecting the dots logically.
Yeah.
But how does that help us figure out who the murderer is?
Well, that's where the power of syllogisms comes in.
Okay.
Detectives use evidence to build a chain of reasoning.
Uh-huh.
Maybe they find out that the only person with access to the knife was Cassandra's business partner.
Okay.
So you get another syllogism.
Okay.
The murderer had access to the knife.
Right.
The business partner had access to the knife.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, the business partner might be the murderer.
I see. It narrows down the possibilities,
Right.
but doesn't give a definitive answer right away.
No, it doesn't.
It's like a piece of the puzzle,
Yes.
not the whole picture.
Exactly.
And those might be situations are important because there are actually a lot of ways syllogisms can be misused,
That's true.
leading to false conclusions.
Yeah.
Those misuses are called fallacies,
Yes.
and they're like logical traps.
That's a good way to think about it.
Ooh, fallacies.
Yeah.
So these are like red flags to watch out for,
Yeah.
not just in a murder investigation,
That's right.
but maybe in everyday arguments too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Recognizing fallacies is a key part of critical thinking.
For instance,
Yes.
there's one fallacy that assumes just because two things happen together,
Uh-huh.
one caused the other.
Yeah.
Like saying Cassandra's business was struggling,
Okay.
then she was murdered.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, her business partner killed her for the insurance money.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And it feels like a jump in logic.
It is?
Just because the business was failing doesn't automatically mean the partner's a murderer.
Right.
What else should we know about these syllogisms?
Well, the important thing with syllogisms is that they deal with categories.
Okay.
But logic isn't limited to just categories.
Uh-huh.
The lectures also introduce sentential logic,
Okay.
which broadens our scope.
Sentential logic. Does
Yeah.
that mean instead of dealing with groups,
Uh,
we're looking at individual statements?
Yes.
And how they connect?
That's it.
Okay.
It's all about the if-then relationship between statements.
Okay.
For example, if the security camera footage is clear,
Okay.
then we'll see who entered Cassandra's office that night.
Okay, that's a statement about potential evidence.
Right.
But I can see how if then goes beyond just describing things,
Uh-huh.
it can be used for hypotheticals too, right?
That's right.
Like if someone wanted Cassandra dead,
Yeah.
then they'd benefit from her will.
You got it.
Okay.
That's what makes sentential logic so powerful.
Yeah.
It lets us connect descriptive statements about what is
Okay.
with prescriptive statements about what should be,
Okay.
predictive statements about what will be, and even counterfactual statements about what would have been.
Wait, counterfactuals.
Yeah.
So we can use logic to explore alternative scenarios.
Yes.
Like what would have happened if the security camera hadn't malfunctioned that night?
Precisely.
Okay.
Counterfactuals are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Historians use them all the time to analyze what might have changed the course of events.
Right.
And in a murder investigation, they help detectives explore different motives and possibilities.
This is fascinating.
It is a powerful tool.
We're taking logic from ancient Greece to hypothetical scenarios.
Yeah.
And it's all connected to this murder mystery.
It all fits together.
Where do we go from here?
Well, the lectures then dive into something called rules of inference.
Okay.
These are like tools for building and evaluating arguments.
Tools.
Yeah.
So we're getting a whole logic toolkit
That's right.
to help us solve this case.
Uh-huh.
And maybe even real-life problems.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me more about these rules.
There are 6 main rules. Take modus ponens, for instance.
Modus ponens.
It means affirming the antecedent.
Okay.
Basically saying if part of our statement is true,
Okay.
then the part must also be true.
Okay, give me an example using the Cassandra Thomas case.
Let's say we know if the poison was in the coffee.
Okay.
Then the murderer must have had access to Cassandra's office.
Okay.
And let's say the lab results confirm the poison was in the coffee.
Right.
Modus ponens tells us,
Uh-huh.
boom, the murderer had access to the office.
So it's like a logical domino effect.
Yeah.
One truth leads to another.
Right.
But can't that go wrong sometimes?
Oh, it certainly can.
What if the then part is true, but the if part isn't?
You're thinking like a true logician.
Okay.
That's a common mistake
Uh-oh.
called affirming the consequent.
Okay.
And it's a fallacy.
Okay.
Just because we know the murderer had access to the office
Right.
doesn't automatically mean the poison was in the coffee.
Right.
There could be other ways to get poisoned.
This is getting tricky.
Yeah, logic can be tricky.
So we have to be careful about how we apply these rules.
Yes.
Even if they seem straightforward.
That's right.
Okay, I'm ready to learn about these other rules of inference.
Oh.
What else is in our logic toolkit?
Well, there's modus tollens,
Modus tollens.
which is like the opposite of modus ponens. Modus tollens is all about denying the consequent.
Okay.
So if the then part of our statement is false,
Right.
we know the if part must also be false.
Give me a murder mystery example. I'm starting to get the hang of this.
Okay, say the police initially suspect Cassandra's ex-husband.
Okay.
They reason if the ex-husband wanted revenge,
Okay.
then he would have used his own gun.
Okay.
However, ballistic analysis shows the murder weapon was not his gun.
Right.
Modus tollens tells us that he probably didn't want revenge, at least not in a way that involved using his own weapon.
So this rule helps us eliminate suspects or theories
Right.
that don't align with the evidence.
Exactly.
But doesn't modus tollens also have a sneaky twin like that, affirming the consequent fallacy we talked about?
You're sharp. It's called denying the antecedent.
Denying the antecedent. Okay.
It's the mistake of thinking that just because the if part is false, the then part must also be false.
Okay, so even if the ex-husband didn't want revenge in that particular way,
Right.
it doesn't mean he's completely innocent.
Doesn't at all.
He might have had another motive entirely.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be cautious about applying these rules and to consider all possibilities.
This is making me think about all those crime dramas where the detectives jump to conclusions
I know, right?
based on seemingly solid logic.
Yeah.
Now I see how those leaps in reasoning can actually be fallacies in disguise.
That's a great observation. And it highlights how understanding logic can help us be more critical viewers. Not just of fictional crime shows, but of real-world arguments, too.
Yeah.
Think about political speeches, news articles, even debates with friends. Fallacies pop up everywhere.
Okay, I'm ready to take my logic skills to the next level. What are some other rules of inference we should know about?
We have hypothetical syllogism.
Hypothetical syllogisms.
Okay, which is essentially transitive reasoning,
Okay.
but with whole statements.
Got it.
If A leads to B
Okay.
and B leads to C,
Uh-huh.
then A leads to C.
Ah, so it's like connecting a chain of events. Give me an example from the Cassandra Thomas case.
Let's imagine the detectives have established these two facts.
Okay.
If the poison was in the wine, then Cassandra drank it before closing up the store.
Okay.
And they also know if Cassandra drank the wine before closing, then the murderer must have been someone she trusted.
Okay, I see where this is going. We're building a case based on the sequence of events.
Exactly. Hypothetical syllogism allows us to combine those statements
Okay.
and conclude if the poison was in the wine, then the murderer must have been someone Cassandra trusted.
That narrows down the suspect pool significantly.
Yes, it does.
It's no longer just about anyone who had access, but about those who had her trust.
Precisely. And this rule is used all the time in investigations and scientific research, and even in our daily decision-making.
I'm seeing how these rules can be applied in so many different ways. What about the other three rules?
We have reductio ad absurdum, a fancy way of saying you reduce an opponent's argument to an absurdity to disprove it.
Okay.
Then there's disjunctive syllogism, which is about choosing between two possibilities by eliminating one.
Okay, I can see how those would be useful in a debate or an argument. What's the last one?
The final rule is constructive dilemma,
Constructive dilemma.
which helps us draw implications from both possibilities when we're faced with a choice. It's like saying, if we do this, then this will happen.
Uh-huh.
If we do that, then something else will happen.
Okay.
Therefore, no matter what we choose, there will be consequences.
That sounds like a way to evaluate decisions more carefully by thinking through all the potential outcomes.
Yes.
But let's be honest, not all arguments are structured like syllogisms.
Right.
Or neatly laid out with if-then statements.
You're right.
How did these rules apply to more messy real-world situations?
You're right. The lectures actually use a fascinating example to illustrate this point.
Okay.
They present two newspaper editorials.
Okay.
One well-written and one riddled with logical flaws.
Ooh, that sounds like a challenge. I'm ready to put my logic detective hat on. What's the first editorial about?
It argues that the mayor of a city called Gameton should increase funding for police security.
Okay.
It cites rising crime rates and criticizes the current allocation of resources to a new prison instead of preventative measures.
Okay, on the surface, it seems like a reasonable argument.
It does.
But how can we use our logic toolkit to break down the structure and see if it holds up?
Notice how the editorial sets up a choice.
Okay.
Either we fund the police or we fund the prison.
Right.
It then uses modus tollens to show that funding the prison isn't working as intended.
Okay.
Because the promised economic benefits haven't materialized.
Right.
Since one option is eliminated, the conclusion is that we should fund the police.
Ah, so it's using logic to present a clear and compelling argument
Exactly.
for a particular course of action.
Yes.
What about the second editorial? What makes it logically flawed?
This one tries to argue that lie detector tests are unreliable.
Okay.
Their only piece of evidence is the story of a double agent who managed to pass 2 polygraph tests while spying.
That seems like a weak argument. Just because one person beat the system doesn't mean it's entirely useless, right?
Right.
It's like saying because someone got away with speeding once radar detectors don't work.
Exactly. That's the fallacy of hasty generalization.
Hasty generalization.
Okay, the editorial is making a sweeping conclusion based on a single anecdote.
Right.
We need more substantial evidence to claim that all lie detector tests are unreliable.
So how would we dissect this argument to expose its logical flaws?
Let's break it down. The editorial is essentially saying, if lie detectors are reliable, then all humans undergo uncontrollable physiological changes when they lie. However, this double agent didn't show those changes.
Right.
So lie detectors must be unreliable.
Okay, I see the structure. They're using modus tollens, which is a valid rule of inference.
Yes.
So what's the problem?
The problem is the first premise, if lie detectors are reliable, then all humans undergo uncontrollable changes that sets an impossibly high standard.
Right.
It's like saying that a medical test is worthless if it fails to diagnose every single case perfectly.
So the logic itself is fine, but the foundation of the argument, that initial premise, is faulty.
Yep.
It's like building a house on a shaky foundation.
That's a perfect analogy. And this highlights another important point.
Okay.
Sometimes, even if an argument uses valid logical structure,
Right.
it can still be flawed if it's based on false assumptions or weak evidence.
This whole discussion is making me more aware of all the subtle ways arguments can go wrong, but it also feels a bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
There are so many rules, so many potential fallacies.
Right.
How can we keep it all straight in the real world, especially when things get heated and emotional?
That's where understanding informal fallacies comes in.
Informal fallacies. Okay.
These are less about breaking the formal rules logic and more about using problematic reasoning that weakens an argument, even if it sounds persuasive on the surface.
Okay, so informal fallacies are more about sneaky tactics and rhetorical tricks than about faulty syllogisms.
Give me some examples.
Sure.
What should we be watching out for?
The lectures use a brilliantly entertaining example.
Okay.
A fictional detective meeting where everyone's trying to solve the Cassandra Thomas case, but they keep falling into these logical traps.
I'm picturing a smoky room, tense faces, and everyone accusing each other while making these logical blunders.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
Tell me more.
Well, one detective might commit the fallacy of appeal to popularity.
Appeal to popularity.
He'll say everyone in town knows Cassandra and her business partner were fighting, so it must have been him. That's like the everyone's doing it so it must be okay argument.
Right.
Just because something's popular doesn't make it true.
That's right.
What other fallacies do these detectives fall into?
Another detective, maybe a bit more cynical, might use the ad ignorantium fallacy.
Ad ignorantium.
He'll claim, look, we haven't found any evidence that disproves the gardener did it, so he must be the culprit.
So it's about shifting the burden of proof instead of actually providing evidence. Sneaky.
Very sneaky.
What else should we be wary of in this detective meeting?
Let's say a detective is really fixated on Cassandra's ex-husband.
Okay.
Someone might point out inconsistencies in his theory,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll just deflect by saying, well, you weren't there that night, so you don't know what really happened.
That's like shutting down the conversation instead of engaging with the argument.
Right.
Avoiding the issue doesn't make it go away.
Exactly, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to informal fallacies.
Oh.
There are many more ways people try to manipulate arguments, distract from the real issues, or attack their opponents instead of the ideas.
This detective meeting sounds like a goldmine of logical fallacies.
It really is.
What are some other examples we should know about?
Let's dive into some more of these informal fallacies. There's the appeal to authority.
Appeal to authority, that sounds familiar. Is that like when someone says, my favorite celebrity uses this product, so it must be amazing?
Exactly. It's about relying on the endorsement of someone famous or influential, even if they're not an expert on the topic at hand, like citing a movie star's opinion on climate change.
Right.
Their fame doesn't automatically make them an authority on scientific matters.
Right. Expertise in one area doesn't translate to another. It's about recognizing relevant credentials and evidence, not just blindly following someone's word because they're popular.
Precisely, and that's a core principle of critical thinking. Questioning assumptions, evaluating sources, and thinking for yourself. Don't let someone's fame or title do your thinking for you.
What are some other fallacies these detectives might be committing in their heated debate?
Imagine one detective is presenting a complex theory about the murder weapon. Another detective, trying to poke holes in his argument, simplifies it to the point of absurdity and says, so you're saying a squirrel broke in, stole the knife, and committed the murder. That's ridiculous.
That's not fair. It's like twisting someone's words and then attacking that distorted version of their argument. Isn't there a name for that tactic?
It's called the straw man fallacy.
Straw man.
It's a way to avoid engaging with the actual argument by misrepresenting it as something weaker and easier to attack.
I've definitely seen that happen in online debates where people exaggerate their opponent's position to make it seem more extreme or illogical. It's a way to score points without actually addressing the real issue.
Exactly, and it's a tactic that often derails productive conversations and leads to more heat than light.
So we've got appeal to popularity, ad ignorantium, avoiding the issue, and the straw man fallacy. Are there any others we should be on the lookout for in this detective meeting?
Well, one detective might try to change the subject entirely to distract from the lack of evidence supporting his theory.
Okay.
He might suddenly say, wait a minute, why are we even focusing on the knife? What about Cassandra's missing necklace? Maybe this is a robbery gone wrong.
That's classic misdirection. It's like a magician's sleight of hand shifting our attention away from the real issue. Is there a name for this fallacy?
It's called the red herring fallacy.
Red herring, okay.
It introduces an irrelevant topic to distract from the main argument, and it's surprisingly effective, especially when emotions are running high.
It's like that saying, look a squirrel. It makes us forget what we were originally focused on.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to stay focused on the core issue at hand and not get sidetracked by irrelevant distractions.
This whole conversation is making me realize that logic isn't just some abstract academic subject.
Yeah.
It's deeply embedded in how we think, argue, and make decisions every day. And being aware of these fallacies can help us navigate this complex world of information and persuasion more effectively.
That's a key takeaway from this deep dive. Logic isn't about winning arguments or proving yourself right. It's about thinking clearly, evaluating evidence fairly, and being open to changing your mind when presented with new information.
So it's a tool for intellectual honesty and self-reflection, not just for outsmarting others.
Precisely. And it's a skill that can be honed with practice. The more you pay attention to the structure of arguments, identify potential fallacies, and challenge your own assumptions, the sharper your critical thinking skills will become.
This has been such an insightful journey. We started with a murder mystery and ended up with the whole toolkit for understanding logic, evaluating arguments, and thinking more critically about the world around us.
And the best part is that these skills are applicable to any field or situation, whether you're analyzing news articles, engaging in political discussions, making decisions in your personal life, or even just enjoying a good detective novel.
Yeah.
Logic and critical thinking will always be valuable assets.
So for you listening out there, remember, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those critical thinking caps on. Who knows, maybe you'll even solve a mystery or two along the way. Until next time on The Deep